Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth webinar in our symposium, Wrapping Up, Taking Stock, and Moving Forward, the New Reality for K-12 Education. We are thrilled to have so many of you with us today, particularly since this week marks the 11th week that we've been bringing you these K-12 COVID-19 webinars. We are so grateful to have been here with you since the beginning of this crisis, and we will continue to be a resource for you as long as you need it. Today, we will be discussing a new kind of spaced out student, educating students with continued social distancing. I'm Jackie Gharapour Wernz, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And I'm joined today by members of our regular panel, Fattore Crumley, Shelli Anderson.
Hi, everyone.
And Jennifer Smith.
Hello.
We're also thrilled to welcome today as a guest panelist, Mina Griffith, who is Assistant Superintendent for Student Services at Plainfield School District 202. At District 202, which is a unit district covering pre-K through 12 and the fifth largest district in the state, Mina's responsibilities include oversight and management of all special education services and programs, as well as support services for the at-risk student population. She also oversees health services, the Bonnie Macbeth Early Learning Center and Plainfield Academy, and she also leads the school district's bullying task force. Welcome, Mina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So today's webinar is the second of 4 webinars in which we're addressing the differences to the face of education that fall 2020 is going to bring for us. In this webinar today, we're going to be talking about the differences as they relate to students. We've always had some spaced out students, but the challenges schools must prepare to address during ongoing social distancing will give a new meaning to that phrase. We're going to talk about a number of different topics today, like staggered schedules, remote learning, discipline, all sorts of things. But we will also take your questions during the final portion of the webinar today. So do please submit your questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them during the webinar. As always, if you find yourself looking for more information, or if we're not able to get to your question today, please reach out to one of us for more information. And also make sure that you sign up for the remaining sessions in our webinar symposium, which will occur each Thursday at noon through June 11th. Our next webinar is June 4th at noon and is entitled A Whole New World, Labor and Employment Challenges for the 2021 school year. You can find out more information about the symposium and our webinars, alerts, blogs, and podcasts on our website at franczek.com. All right, so jumping in, Mina, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your district for any of those who might not be familiar?
Of course. Well, District 202 is located in Plainfield, Joliet, Romeoville, Bolingbrook. We span quite a few areas. We have about 26,000 students pre-K through 21. We also have a wide variety of special education programs. We do pride ourselves in having many programs that are specialized for students with special needs. We have about 17% of our students have IEPs or are in special education. About 27% of our students are free and reduced lunch, and about 8% of our students are identified as ELL.
So what has your focus been on at the district as you all prepare for the next school year and the challenges that schools are going to be facing in educating students?
Well, right now our focus has been on extended school year, or ESY. We did make the decision quite a few weeks ago to go to remote learning for ESY. Because we are so large, we felt that we needed to begin planning for that well in advance of the summer program. And so really we've had time to establish some common guidelines for teachers in ESY. So at the beginning, when we went to remote learning, our teachers had more freedom. And so our focus for ESY was really tightening things up. So looking at a common platform for all of our teachers, specific programs that they would use in order to have a common expectation so that our teachers, our students, and our parents really knew what to expect during ESY. The other thing we've really focused on is looking at core curriculum standards for next year. So this summer we are looking, we have some curriculum teams that are coming together both in special education and in our curriculum and instruction, really looking at what are those core standards that we would want our teachers to focus on when we come back to school in the fall.
So Mina, are you indicating that you were having more flexibility for your teachers and how they provided remote learning at the end of the 1920 school year, and then seeing a more focused approach over the summer? Is that how you decided to handle it?
Yes, our teachers got a lot more freedom when remote learning started because we wanted them to do what was comfortable for them. Our district was not a one-to-one district, and so remote learning really was something that was new for us. So moving forward, especially for ESY, we've tried to put a focus on providing one device per student to ensure that all of our students could have that. Whereas previously we had more of a focus on our students that were free and reduced, homeless, or foster received computers. So since for ESY we can ensure that every student has a device, we wanted to make sure that then we could have a common expectation for all of our teachers.
Now, Mina, I know that your experience in special education will probably be of great interest to our viewers, and we've talked a lot about remote learning plans, remote learning service plans for students with IEPs during this time and into the fall. Do you have any thoughts you can share on that issue?
Well, I will say I think that was one of the best decisions we made at the beginning of all of this. Was when we learned that we were going to remote learning, we decided to make remote learning service plans for students. Looking at how to provide IEP services for students is very different remote versus in person, and everybody knows that. But that was something that all of our teachers, our related service providers really needed to look at differently. So we had them create what was called a related service plan for every student. Every related service provider had to do that as well, which really focused on what are the IEP goals for the student and what does that look like in remote learning. So we did have plans during the school year, and then those plans will also be adjusted for ESY, but it helped our teachers really look at services differently, kind of change their mindset. Another thing that was important is once they created those plans, they had to share them with parents, because I could create the best plan in the world, but if I share it with a parent and a parent says there's no way, even though we have computer access, we're not going to be able to do that, they need to be able to do what works for the family and the student in remote learning. We can't just plan in isolation.
Dana and Jennifer, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on your work with schools on remote plans for students with IEPs.
Well, one thing to just be aware of is that there is a lawsuit that's been filed here in the Northern District of Illinois by the Chicago Teachers Union against the U.S. Department of Ed, but Betsy DeVos. It really targets her. CPS is also named, but on this issue of whether it's feasible to do remote learning plans for every student, and basically challenging Betsy DeVos's decision not to waive the requirements that really require, with nothing waived in the process or procedures, without communicating that to parents what the changes are going to be. There's no way to argue you haven't violated IDEA. So the lawsuit is about whether Betsy DeVos should have used her authority and at least given under the CARES Act to waive that. So it'll be interesting to watch that lawsuit. So I just say that as a point, people might be interested in following. I would not put betting odds on a court saying that Betsy was required to use her discretion to waive IDEA requirements. That is a very long shot Hail Mary of a lawsuit, but I just thought it would be of local interest here in Illinois.
Yeah, and I think that many of our clients, in my experience, have done what Mina, what you've done in Plainfield, because you're right, it was an incredible amount of work going into it, but I think the effort was rewarded with having parents on board at the start. And making that connection, making that communication, that initial communication makes follow-up communication so much easier. to manage. So, I mean, I think that was a wise move.
So Mina, switching gears a little bit, what about staff development in preparation for next school year? Any thoughts on what you guys are doing there?
That really is the most important part at this point in time, especially now that we have time to make a plan for what it's going to look like for next year. So we're really starting with our ESY teachers. So now that we've made a decision that everyone's using a specific platform and here are our district resources, we're making sure that all of our ESY teachers have very specific targeted professional development. So some of that actually already started this week. And the way we structured our ESY day is so that our teachers can continue to receive weekly professional development throughout ESY. You know, when we're all learning, we don't want to learn everything all at once and then, you know, use only one part of it. So the thought is we would start with one bigger training, and then each week we would provide a smaller training that they can then add to that week's lesson, and then build each week with each of the new features that they learn. So the district's also doing professional development for all of our teachers. We're offering that over the summer. So if teachers don't participate over the summer, there will be opportunities for them to do it at the start of the school year. But that really is the most important part. If we train our teachers appropriately, then they'll be more prepared to provide good instruction to students when the school year starts.
What about like in the moment assistance? Have you taken any steps to sort of have coaching or resources available for teachers?
So we are looking at a couple different models. Right now, one thing that we're doing is we're establishing what are called exemplar planning committees. So we will have a group of teachers that will provide kind of some exemplar or strong plans for teachers to use as a reference over the summer. Really giving them the idea of this is what we see as a great plan for reading or math or social emotional, and having a place where they could go and see what that would look like. Because, you know, after you go to a training, if you don't know what that looks like in practice, you may be questioning yourself. So those exemplar planning committees are going on for our extended school year staff, but they're also going on over the summer for our curriculum committees for our general education staff as well. We're also very lucky. This year we were able to hire a director of innovation and technology, and she's done an amazing job working with our teachers, with our administrators, and establishing what are called trailblazer teachers at our schools. So the schools that are lucky enough to have those trailblazer teachers can also provide support to teachers within their building.
Now, Dana, I know that Mina's district has a lot of resources. Do you have any thoughts on how this might look in a smaller district that maybe doesn't have quite as many options?
Well, I mean, I do think this is going to be an area where everyone's going to have to use their creativity, because I think it's sort of a must do, considering where we are now and what we anticipate going forward. So I think reaching out to vendors for ideas and model lessons for in a smaller district, that they have a vendor that they work with. I also think that they can, you know, sort of grow their own, and if they can't do, you know, if they're not going to be doing PD on more of a large scale, to do it on a small scale so that they have a core group. Having a model, I think, is really important for people, because a model can help you, you know, it lays out the components, it gives you an example, and I think that can help smaller districts help teachers and at the same time hold them accountable for some standardization, which I think is so important going forward. You know, we can't just say it's too hard. We have to keep going.
I was wondering though, outside of kind of the academic component of it, I mean, we saw so much coming out of ISB and the guidance related to the importance of social emotional learning and a focus on professional development for all staff as it relates to how to handle kids, whether we come back in school or remotely. Mina, what are you guys doing there with respect to SEL, PD for your teachers going into either ESY or next school year?
Well, similar to the Director of Innovation and Technology, we are lucky that this past year SEL was a priority for our district. So this past year, we were actually able to hire 30 additional social workers, as well as invest in some social emotional resources for our staff that we did not previously have. So we do have, at our elementary specifically, we have Second Step, which does provide professional development and both resources for online and in-person instruction. We've also invested in professional development through Capturing Kids' Hearts. And we made a full district initiative to invest in a program called Panorama, which surveys our students to identify where they are performing in different social emotional areas, and then gives teachers specific targeted instruction that they could use for students, either whole class or a small group or even individual. So we just happened to invest in all of those things right before this happened. So it is a priority for our district. In ESY, we are requiring a SEL time every day where students will receive instruction in that. And we're also looking at that for next year as well as part of our draft schedule.
Now, I know one of the hardest things for school districts right now in planning is that we don't know what's going to happen. We might be back to school, we might be fully remote, or we might have some mixture of the two. How are you all balancing that, Mina? What are you doing with respect to that uncertainty in making plans for next school year?
Well, probably like a lot of districts, we're looking at 3 different plans because we don't necessarily know where the state is going to recommend where we are at the beginning of the school year. So we've started with fully remote learning because we feel like that needs to have the most professional development and planning that takes place. Another model that we're looking at would be what's considered a blended model, which would be, if we need to have less students in class, having half the students attend one day, and while the other half of the students are looking at remote learning. So almost an A-B type of a schedule. And then the final schedule that we're looking at would be is if we're all in person, and what does that look like with the CDC guidelines? So we feel like if we prepare for full remote learning and full in person, and then make sure that either model works well with that blended learning, we'll be in a good place. But it's a lot of planning and a lot of questions and answers at this time.
So then,
oh, I'm sorry. I was
okay.
going to ask Mina. So as you think about coming back into the building full time, have you thought about some of the supplies you need, the entry into the building, just sort of the logistical things that need to happen?
Dana, there's so many topics we're looking at right now. We've talked about a lot of different things. So one thing that we started actually was a shared folder where we could identify different, what we consider problems or problems to solve, and really looking at what are those issues and what do we already have answers for now and which ones do we still need to look for answers. We don't have all the answers at this point in time, but we figure we can start with the ones that we know how to handle, and then we can move on from there. We'd really rather be over-prepared than under-prepared.
Now, in the CDC guidelines, we actually got a question that this kind of flows into pretty well about, it references you need social distancing when feasible. And so one of our participants asked, in phase 4, where it states that that only 50 or less people may gather, if class sizes are between 25 and 30 students, what are the mandates and recommendations for social distancing in classrooms for the fall? Jennifer, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, this is an unsatisfying answer, but we don't know how to reconcile those yet, and we expect more state guidance. What I think is interesting about the planning that Plainfield has done, for example, I remember talking to Mina several weeks about remote learning or ESY, and that you had just made the decision to go remote learning before that was a state mandate or the state guidance. So we don't know what the timing of state guidance is, and we appreciate that administrators like you have to make decisions at times that you can still practically implement things, and so sometimes you're making decisions ahead without the guidance. I mean, so I would say there's, I don't know how to reconcile that exactly in classes between 25 and 30 students. I don't have a specific answer other than we may not have a specific answer, and you may be doing contingency plans like Plainfield, because we very well may even get something as late as, late July or early August where everyone has to scramble again. So I think having flexibility in your plan is probably critical.
Dana, before we move forward on this part, I mean, can you just talk a little bit about what we talked about during prep about kind of the unique spacing that you've seen in an article that you recently read this morning? I think people will be interested to hear about that.
So I mean, I do think we're going to have to, we were talking about this morning, I do think we're going to have to look at, and this was from the architect last week, look at using class space differently and having less students in a classroom. But and we're going to talk about early childhood in a minute and social distancing when feasible, and how do you keep kids from socially distancing with each other, which I'm sure everybody that's ever taught school or had a kid knows that it's very hard to keep them from touching each other and things that you don't want them to touch. And if you Google this, you have Chinese first graders back to school after the coronavirus. You'll get a really cute picture of how they tackled it in one Chinese school. And they basically had the kids make hats, and the hats had either balloons or very lightweight, like rolls of paper or cardboard that just stick out from the sides, and they just come out. And that keeps the other kids away from them. And they were all sitting, if you Google the picture, they're all sitting in their little desks. They're just adorable. Wearing masks, which we're also going to talk about in a minute more in detail. So I think that, you know, it's uncomfortable to talk about these things because we've never done them before, but we have to, that just made me think anything is possible, and we can put our heads together and figure things out if we need to.
Yeah, I think that goes to answering one of the questions that just came in was talking about that, about spacing issues if kids all come back. And I think that's a perfect example of a school utilizing creativity for even the youngest of kids to show them kind of what it means to be distant, to actually have something physical between the two of them. So I loved that story. So,
and that also goes back to what Mina said about professional development. Like teachers of different populations, whether you teach little kids or you teach 12-year-olds, they need to be able to come together and talk about how to make this meaningful for kids. So like anything else in education, it's time is always an issue, finding the time.
Another issue we've talked a lot about with respect to how are we going to educate students in this new spaced out world is with this idea of block scheduling. And one of the questions that we actually received at the end of our last webinar, but that we really felt went well with today's topic, was how do we deal with the fact that there are considerations that teaching kids in shifts will inevitably create. So parents of students may not be able to get back to work if their student is only in school 2 days a week. And that includes school employees. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, Jackie, we've gotten a lot of questions about this, about what we do with those teachers who say, you know, our school might be coming back in a shift where I'm expected to be at work on these days or performing instruction on these days, but my kid's schedule is different with respect to their school, and it becomes a childcare issue. And I think what schools have to remember is that for those parents who are unable to perform their job because the childcare is unavailable or school is unavailable on those particular days for those kids, that they are going to be able to access the extended or expanded rather FMLA leave up until December 30th. So really making sure that you're taking into consideration kind of all of those pieces when deciding what's going to be best for your district.
And then Mina, what are you doing for parental engagement relating to parents returning to school?
Well, we talked a lot about teacher professional development, but one thing that we found is really important is that professional development for parents. You know, how do I know what my students are doing? How can I check to see what they're doing in their Google Classroom? So that was something that we heard from our parents as well. So we did survey our parents, and so one of the things that we're offering is professional development through them, starting with ESY, but then also at the beginning of the school year. Another thing that we are doing is our curriculum and instruction department is actually meeting with a small group of parents and reviewing what our draft plans are for next year. So looking at the expectations for teachers, for students, and what that draft schedule would be, because we need to hear not only from our staff and our administration about what's working and what needs to be changed, but also we need to hear from our parents as well.
Now, on that issue of staff training, Shelli, we've seen a lot of guidance. We've been talking a lot within the firm about the recent guidance about training employees to go back to work generally. Can you give us an update on what's out there on that topic and what resources are available?
Sure. I think one of the things that's coming down is just the reality of training our staff on how to handle, so in the event that we are able to go back to school with students, or even those staff who are, in the buildings, the 12-month employees who've come back already, making sure that they're being provided training on all the specifics. So how to handle a situation where they might be symptomatic and being able to screen themselves as to when they should be coming into work or not, how to respond to a student who might seem symptomatic, how to respond to a student who says that someone at home has tested positive, how to clean your desk at the end of the day, how to handle a kid who does not wear a mask. I mean, I know we're going to touch on that in a little bit, but those sort of protocols, providing training to all your staff early on that, and so there's one consistent message of how you're handling it, I think is going to, from a liability perspective, put the district in a better position, but it's also going to provide much more of a sense of consistency for the families, so they know what to expect when their kids are coming back to school and what the kind of rules and procedures are going to be.
Shelli, there also, I really think this flows well, that we got a question, what about a teacher with health issues who would be at a great risk teaching a class of 25? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, and I think we're going to touch a lot about these types of issues in our next webinar related to kind of the labor and employment related issues. But just to respond briefly, I think that if a teacher has health issues and such that they can't come back and teach a class of 25, if that's where we're at, even if everyone is wearing a mask, I mean, that could very well become an FMLA issue for that teacher outside of what the extended FMLA is, whether or not they have a serious health condition such that they cannot return to that working environment. So the counsel I've been given to everyone I talk to about this is you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Do not make any kind of grand proclamations about who does or does not have to return to school under what circumstances, because everyone is going to have their own set of circumstances, and making sure that remembering that fair is not equal necessarily, so that you have to look at everybody's case individually to make that determination.
And then Mina, thinking about all of the materials and supplies and cleaning products that Shelli was mentioning from the recent guidance, what is your district thinking about when it comes to that issue?
Well, right now we are starting with the basics. So, we talked earlier, there's a lot of questions we're tackling. So we're starting with just what are the basics that are needed in the classroom. So for example, hand sanitizer, cleaning spray, what are our custodians going to need? So we're starting with those orders because truly that's going to be what's the most difficult to purchase at this point in time. Other things we're looking at are nursing supplies and masks. So starting with more of the big picture, and then we'll get into more of the details later on.
And then what about masks? How is the district thinking about handling purchasing masks?
Well, there's so many different things to consider when purchasing masks. Right now, what we're looking at for students is having kind of a base supply of disposable masks, but also looking at purchasing at least one mask that can be reusable for students. So for example, if a student forgets their mask one day, we want to be able to provide them with one, not that they will just throw in the garbage, but if they need to, they could bring it home, wash it, and bring it back to school the next day. I can tell you though, the cost of masks is pretty excessive. And so for a district our size, over 26,000, the paper masks range anywhere from about $1.60. Reusable masks can be anywhere from $3 to $6. So it really can be an investment. And that's one of the things we're researching right now.
And Mina, have you gotten any pushback either on the staff or student side about wearing masks?
We haven't gotten any pushback from staff at this point. And since students haven't returned, we have not received that. But that's actually a question that we would have for you is what would we do if we got pushback from students on not wanting to wear a mask?
What about parents? Have you gotten any feedback from parent communities? Or I know you've solicited feedback in different surveys and whatnot.
With a district as large as ours, we've received feedback from parents both ways. I won't come back unless everyone's wearing a mask. And if my students come back, I don't want them to have to wear a mask. So we really have received the whole range of responses on that topic.
So let's unpack a little bit. I think for staff members, you know, I think we've already started to have some staff members question the need for a mask or be hesitant to wear a mask. But I mean, most of the staff members we have back now are office staff or custodians. Shelli, how have you addressed that?
Well, I think that most of the districts that have called and talked to me about it, they are all, except for our grounds folks who are outside, who don't necessarily kind of work in close parameters with anybody else, they all are wearing masks and are able to keep within 6 feet apart from one another. I've not really had any pushback from it yet, but I mean, most of the employees who are back now are outside the union, so we wouldn't necessarily have seen that. I do think that, like anything else, for those of you who have contracts with uniform provisions in them, for instance, this is going to be another component of that. How many masks, the type of mask, who pays for the mask, how much you pay for the mask, if they can wear their own mask. I mean, all of that is likely going to be something that we're going to have to work out some sort of agreement to the extent that the unions feel that they should be involved in those decisions.
And really, it's a mirror as far as students. So notice, we're going to have to give notice in some form, whether it's by updating codes of conduct or having some sort of separate policy that's going to address mask wearing. We can't, if we're going to enforce certain expectations, we need to communicate those in writing, because I do anticipate that if a student was really dug in and refused to put on a mask, and that was the expectation and the requirement for school, it will be a suspension if we send that student home. There's not a different way to remove the student at this point from the building other than to actually have it be a suspension. So you're going to have to do your SB 100 paperwork. Again, unless something changes, and there's been so many legislative changes, this is an issue where I could see possibly ISB coming up with guidance where you can exclude a student through a different process, because it really is different. And I can see tempers flaring if we start calling this a suspension when, it just has a different feel to it. I guess depending on the circuit, obviously if a student was just insubordinate and cursing and aggressive, then you have that additional behavior. But because it's been so politicized, if there's some sort of like First Amendment stand, it's my right to support a political party by not wearing a mask. There's a potential for some really complicated issues.
And that's why really, if there's a place to advocate with ISB for some sort of guidance, because I mean, I do think there's strong legal arguments that you can require kids to wear masks if we come back under these circumstances. It's a health and safety issue. It should not be a political issue. First graders do not need to be involved in political matters. They need to come to school and learn. So I am concerned about it going through SB 100. I think that's burdensome, but I think the best way to sort of prevent that is to, get parent groups together, have some education, have, teachers have the right modeling, and it is something that you're doing in the building. We're not going to worry about what you're doing outside, but in the building to keep everybody safe. These are the things that we're going to follow. And I think you can get a lot of compliance that way and hopefully minimize some of the stress.
Another issue I can see coming, because masks have become such an opportunity for speech in the different things that are printed on them, and so yes, I'll wear a mask, but it's it talks about the hate speech, or who knows, or it has some offensive image that we're going to then censor. So there could be some real interesting questions with masks for sure.
That's why your idea earlier that you were talking about, Mina, mask with the school logo on them or fun masks, maybe a good investment.
That was exactly what we were thinking. When students wear inappropriate clothing, we ask them to wear their gym shirt or a school shirt. And so that's really the thought behind the disposable masks, is if you are wearing something that's inappropriate, we would consider it the same way and give you an alternative option to wear.
Now, some districts may want to try to avoid some of these sticky mask situations by saying, well, if we have kids social distancing in the classroom or indoors somewhere? Do we still have to have them wear masks? What do folks think about that?
I mean, we can only go on the guidance that experts give us in this area. I mean, I did see some other countries are experimenting with different levels of precaution, and I saw one where they were not doing masks. So certainly, I mean, I'm glad we'll have the benefit of more of that information, and it wouldn't be shocking if we get more guidance that, well, this turned out to work and this other thing didn't. But the guidance we have right now is you need to wear masks. So I think we need to plan for that, although I am hesitant. You know, I worry all this money being thrown around, you know, if you buy a bunch of masks and then in late July, oh, suddenly we don't need to wear masks, you know. But right now, if you plan to open, you need that. Otherwise, it's not going to be a possibility. So.
And we did get a comment from one of our audience members that they understand that ISB is going to be putting out guidance that does recommend cloth face coverings. So, you know, that may be the case, and we will wait and see. Now, what about masks and students with special needs? Are there any considerations that people should be thinking about on that?
So Mina, I think you've been looking at this issue.
We have, mainly with our students that are deaf or hard of hearing. We know many of our students do read lips, and so we want to make sure that they still have that ability. And obviously a typical cloth mask isn't going to work for that. So I'm sure many of you have seen the pictures of nurses who created or purchased the transparent face masks. So we're actually looking at quite a few options, either a transparent face mask or an actual face shield to wear, because we want to make sure that our students that read lips have that opportunity. Also on the flip side, we have many students that are challenging to understand, and sometimes being able to see their facial expressions helps. So that's another group that we are looking at purchasing similar types of face masks or face shields for as well, because we think that's really important. Obviously, communication is critical in schools, and so we want to make sure that we can provide every student the opportunity that they need. There's some other discussions that we've had as well. We do provide ABA therapy in our district. And so when you look at ABA therapy, people are sitting face to face in a very close environment. So some other things that we're looking at is whether or not we can create kind of those ABA workstations with a plexiglass divider in between, because we want to make sure, again, that's such a critical component of instruction for some of our students, that if we are able to get back in person, can we do that in a safe manner without wearing face masks at that point? So we're really looking at a wide range of options and really looking at cost estimates right now on what would work.
And then when you're dealing with really young kids, so like 3 to 4 year old preschool age students, and they are touching the mask and touching their face, putting their hands in their mouth, is it still going to be appropriate to require the use of masks for those students? What do you think, Mina?
Well, we're going to have to try. You know, there's a lot of things that we could do with our students, whether it's social stories or videos to model how you're supposed to wear it. But one of the things that we really need to consider in our district is making sure that all of our preschool classes have a sink, if possible, in the classroom. Because I just think of the number of times a student may have to wash their hands or rinse off their face. And we know that in a preschool classroom, hand sanitizer would not be appropriate. As a matter of fact, if it's a Preschool for All program, it's a requirement that there is not hand sanitizer in the classroom for students. So really looking at more of, can we get a classroom that has a sink in it? And if we can't, we actually have purchased portable sinks that we've used in the past, and that has been successful. So they can be a little costly, but they have worked in a pinch when we've needed them.
And I think last week we were talking about options like portable sinks and things like that for buildings that may not have the ability to, you know, put those into a classroom. And Dana, your story about the Chinese first graders gives us some good thoughts too about how to handle the younger students.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to be creative with younger kids and make sure that I mean, it is a matter of safety. I think people are really quick to saying they can't do it, but You know, for anyone that's has tried to get a 2-year-old into a car seat, you know, eventually they do it. You know, you can't just live your whole life with not buckling your seatbelt. So I think that we have to remember those types of circumstances and just apply them here. Where we have a safety requirement, we figure out ways.
So thinking about some of the questions that we've received, we got one question that was, one of the toughest concepts to plan for is the provision of public transportation for students within social distancing guidelines. Do you add more routes? Do you encourage parents to drive kids to school? What are the panel's thoughts on this?
So I think those are both two good suggestions right within the question, is looking at adding more routes and you know, organizing the bus so the kids are socially distant. I think you can also talk to, I think the experts will come out with some things on this, because you're looking at how long the trip is and how long the exposure is, and that might be different in a bus, different planning than for in a school setting where someone actually sits in a classroom for several hours a day, or for, you know, several hours in a row. I mean, I think the other thing to think about is, you know, and I know this is not feasible in all areas, but I can basically look out the window right now and see an elementary school, and I will tell you that even though it's walking distance for, I'd say 90% of the kids, most of them don't walk. They either pay to take a bus or they get driven. So I think that might be another way to, I know a lot of schools have walk to school initiatives, but having supervisors meet up with kids and walk to school with younger children and, you know, model that might be another sort of creative approach to that. But we are going to have to keep the safety standards up in those at that time too.
Yeah, because if you think about a bus, I mean, even if you were able to socially distance the kids on the bus and have more bus routes and all of that, you can't expect the bus driver to supervise the kids to make sure their masks are staying on, they're staying in their seats. And now it's not only an issue of staying in their seat for an obvious safety reason if there was an accident, but that they can get sick or injure themselves just by being too close to someone for too long of a period of time. So I think there's that labor component to it as well, as having that supervision. And I think districts are going to have to plan for it, whether it's what Dana, what you're talking about, which I think is an excellent idea, more walk to school initiatives, which would require supervision, or having that additional level of supervision on the buses as well.
Another somewhat related question we received is, if we're back in the building, have you thought about lunches, transportation, and when to take the temperatures of students as they enter school? Is it when they get on the bus? Is it when they enter the building? Mina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we've specifically thought about lunches. We've talked about all those topics, to be honest, but lunches right now, really all of the recommendations we're seeing is that lunches would be in the classroom. And so we would really need to look at, specifically from our department, making sure that those classrooms are allergy safe. We want to make sure that any students that have any type of life-threatening allergy have a classroom then that is allergen safe. So that is something that we haven't had to think about before. You know, we've looked at maybe allergy safe tables if parents had requested that. But now that you're moving food into a classroom, we really need to think about what would that classroom environment be like in order to keep students safe. So we've talked about lunch in the classroom, but then also what would that look like supervision wise? So in our district, we have lunch supervisors. And so typically, you know, one whole grade is having lunch together with a few lunch supervisors. So when we space out lunch into the classrooms, we really now have to talk about staffing considerations. What does that mean? Who's going to supervise the students in the classroom? Would teachers be willing to be paid to supervise students in their lunch? So these are all discussions that we're having at this point in time. Regarding the temperatures, really that is a discussion that we wanted to have with all of you. So, you know, whether or not we want to have students have their temperature taken on the way into the building, or whether or not there's a waiver that we could ask parents to take the student's temperature before they leave their house. So those are options that we've talked about as well.
Now, we received a question on this, and we had also talked about this when we were preparing. What issues are you thinking about with respect to students with fragile immune systems or who need medical services that were previously provided in schools? Mina?
So that's a major concern for us. We do have a unable to attend school periodically throughout the school year. So we really need to get some guidance from IDPH on this, specifically students that may need suctioning or nebulizer treatments or feeding treatments. So we need guidance from the health department on what medical procedures can be provided safely in a school setting with this environment, and really what are not safe to have in school. We don't want our nurses to necessarily have to make those decisions on what can be performed in a school setting.
And then I know we talked about some also during preparation about differences between homebound and homeschooling, and that we think we're probably going to see an uptick in requests for homebound. Can we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm just sort of curious, Mina, how many kids do you have on homebound generally, like without COVID-19? Just
Yeah, on a typical year, we have about 200 students that would either be full-time homebound or intermittent homebound. And that doesn't include students that would be hospitalized. So if you add students that were hospitalized that may need a short-term homebound, that would be about another 150 to 200 more. So quite a bit, because our district is so large in general.
And do you use like part-time staff for that, or do you have full-time staff, or how do you manage them now?
Well, we provide a range of services. So we do have 3 full-time homebound teachers. And they mainly provide services to those students that are really medically fragile and cannot attend school at any point in time, because we want to make sure that those students get a consistent teacher throughout the school year. We do also have students that are intermittent homebound, and we try to use as much as possible our district teachers that can tutor either outside of the school day, or if they're only part-time teachers where they can tutor in the other half of their day. So that's how we've done it up to today.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think that's the concern that we're starting to have, is that it's already sort of a major enterprise to do homebound tutoring, whether kids are anxious, whether they have chronic medical conditions. And, you know, that's something that we've always had to face. And I think it's always been a challenge, frankly, because there are a lot of physicians that write homebound for almost any disorder that's under there, even if it doesn't really match what the disorder is. And I think as we're seeing more concern about transmission of you know, COVID-19, we're going to see more students, maybe those that aren't even necessarily we think of as in that pool of medically fragile students, seeking these kinds of services, and how we're going to have the staff to address them.
Well, I mean, I've seen requests too where parents are just unhappy with the remote learning, and they want the kind of one person, you know, service you usually get through, you know, homebound instruction. So I think districts have already seen some increase in this just at the end of the year, and a little bit of maybe game playing, because obviously you're able to learn at home already. You don't need an assigned individual teacher, unless you do, obviously, unless there's some reason your medical condition precludes you from remote learning. But that would be a different thing.
Well, one big thing that I didn't mention that is a big concern is the requirement of face masks, and knowing that it's not recommended for students that have asthma. So when you think about the large number in every school of students that has asthma, that brings a whole nother concern forward. So, you know, when we talk about the number of homebound requests increasing, I definitely see that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I can see that being a huge labor issue, because while there are your teachers that have no problem going and doing homebound, I think most teachers conceive of their jobs as you go to the school and you do your teaching there. You're not in somebody's living room. So I think that's going to be something that we have to start shifting the mindset on.
Well, another issue is often we do homebound instruction, maybe sometimes not in the home, but prefer a community location like a library or, you know, someplace like that. I think we're going to have to look at those practices, and that's sometimes for the safety of staff and out of concern when there's not witnesses, you know, out of concern about allegations being brought and whatnot. So I think there is going to have to be some additional planning and thoughtfulness around what are you going to do with homebound.
And that might be continuation of remote learning.
Yeah.
That might be a silver lining to all your training that you're doing with remote learning, Mina, is having some staff that are really adept at providing lessons remotely and reaching some of the homebound kids even after this crisis.
Well, we actually just discussed that today, Dana. One of the things we talked about is if teachers are not able to come into school when we go to in-person instruction because of their own medical needs, could they potentially be a remote learning instructor for students that could not come in? So is there a way that we can both continue our teachers teaching when they can't be in the building to support our students that can't be there? So just trying to be as creative as possible to make sure that we can meet everybody's needs.
Yeah, along those lines of kind of creative ways to respond, we had a question about whether or not there's any guidance or any information out there about using PE and art and music teachers as classroom teachers to help lower class size. Is PE going to be required going forward, or is there going to be some kind of relaxation? Can a TA supervise half of a class at a remote location that are viewing a swivel camera broadcast that the licensed teacher is teaching in the classrooms? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I would jump. So there was a lot of there was a lot there. So to start with, as far as breaking class sizes up and having a TA, I mean, that happens all the time, right? We group kids and one part is supported by a TA and the other part, and I think social distancing could be another reason we do that. It's hard to envision the logistics of being able to sufficiently address social distancing just with the use of TAs because of space considerations, but in a limited way, that seems like a possible solution. I'll let others jump in on the art and music. And
yeah, you know, I do. I've read a little bit about that, and I can't remember where I read it because it feels like you read something all the time. But looking, if we're going to continue with remote learning because of the lack of engagement, looking at dividing students into really much smaller groups. And I think it sort of it sort of started with using PE and art teachers and specialist teachers, but it also went further, and it's like, let's train a different type of teacher. And the different type of teacher would be a generalist. So, and I might go back to teaching if they do this, because this is sort of attractive to me. But basically what you would do, you would have like 10 kids and they would go remote for the different subject matter expertise, but you would have to be able to help them with every subject they took. So you would have to help them with their algebra if they were taking algebra. You would have to help them. And so the connection really would be to that sort of teacher mentor, and then you would go to these more expert subject matter teachers, which, you know, they've sort of talked about for years in reaching kids that are hard to reach. But I mean, that might be a model that people are looking at, as if we continue remotely, you know, it's just maybe a little bit more personal for people.
So looking at some of the other questions that we've received, we had a question: do you recommend all IEP students start the year out with revised remote learning IEPs? All special education students, should they all have a parent meeting? Jennifer, do you have thoughts on that?
I do. So as with anything with special ed, it's never all or always. You can, so what I would say is there are going to be students whose IEP could perhaps be implemented without an amendment, without a remote learning plan, possibly because of the type of service, and there's nothing that has to be changed. Even in that situation, I think it would be better to communicate that to the parent so that they know. And so if you could still do a remote learning plan that just says, yeah, we can provide your service remotely, great. You know, nothing would have to change. On the other end of the spectrum, there's services that are not being provided remotely. And if we don't do a remote learning plan and don't have agreement with the parent or do it in an IEP meeting, then what's clear is you'd be violating IDEA, and there's a liability exposure there. So definitely my recommendation would be you need to actually have IEPs reflect the services you're providing, whether that's through a remote learning plan that gives you flexibility in and out. The IEP meetings that I've been to since we've been remote, I would say most teams, whether some districts are doing it more formally, some are doing it more informally, but this is what every parent wants to know is, they want to tell you how remote learning is going, and they want you to problem solve and address in the IEP what their remote learning issues are. So I don't see, especially as time passes, because we keep having meetings, whether it's, a one time and you're proactive like Plainfield and you review them, or, we keep having IEP meetings, and just this is naturally going to happen that we're going to be planning for remote learning as part of the IEP process. Otherwise, there's a liability exposure.
So we also had a question about special education students and the need for some sensory tools such as chew tubes and weighted blankets and vests and things like that. So I think we all are pretty clear we cannot and should not share chew tubes, but for other sensory items, do schools need to consider no more sharing? What do you think, Mina?
That's what we're considering, at least for items that are smaller. So one of the things that we've already discussed as a department and with our OTs and our PTs is really looking at individual sensory bins, meaning that, each student would have their own personal bin. We know that this is going to be a huge expense. However, we know that it's important for student safety. So there's a few things that we would not be able to buy in an individual bag. So for example, we have swings in some of our classrooms. Some of the large balls, obviously we're not going to have, 30 balls in one building. I don't even know where we would store those. But looking at then for those items, having a specific cleaning routine that would be required before and after each student uses those. So that's at least what we're looking at right now, looking at the specific spray and a schedule for cleaning those bigger items.
Mina, what about, that's for special ed students, which obviously have very particular items, but I think, likely in many of your schools, similar to how it is, here with Charlie, that we had a whole list of things that we needed to buy, but they really became classroom supplies. They were not his supplies. What are you thinking in terms of the, gen ed classrooms and how you're going to handle supplies if and when we do come back to school?
Well, it would have to go back to you bring your own supplies and maintain them either in your own art box like we used to have when we were kids, or, in your desk. But really, it's going to have to move away from shared communal supplies. We've even talked about what would that look like for an art class. So one of the things that we discussed just yesterday was, do we need to bring together our art teachers and our music teachers and talk about ways that we can have individual supplies for students? Because that really is a challenge, more so in those encore or specials classes. Because in a regular class, students really can keep their items either in their cubby or in their desk, and we need to really just encourage students not to share.
Yeah.
What do people think about, I know that we're going to have parents who feel really strongly one way or another that they want their kids to either be at home or they want their kids to be at school. Any thoughts about how to field those types of requests from parents?
It depends what the reason they're giving is for wanting, specifically, they don't get to choose if school opens up. At the end of the day, that's what, you almost hesitate to ask because you can't, when you can't honor a request, so you're going to open up if it's safe and the guidance allows you to do so. As far as staying home, if they say, I just am not comfortable, but there's no medical certification, or possibly we get new standards over the summer that are going to allow, if you put a household member at risk. I'm curious to know if that's going to be. And as Mina said, we get medical certifications, on a wide range of things that you wouldn't necessarily think. And I think doctors might be even more inclined right now to be liberal. If a family comes in and asks, I want a medical certification, I can guarantee they can get one. So if they have that medical certification, it is very challenging from a legal perspective to not grant and give homebound at that point. So basically, if they have that medical certification, in most cases, you're going to say, yeah, and you're going to honor that. And then there's a question of, we talked about as far as how you staff it, how do you make it logistically possible, but it could be a significant amount of students.
Well, that is all our time for today. Thank you so much, Mina, for joining us and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a blast, actually.
And thank you so much to our regular panelists.
Well, thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie.
And to everyone at home or wherever you may be, thank you for joining us. And we will look forward to seeing you next week when we are talking about labor and employment issues. And until then, please take care.
Bye.
Bye.